Have you ever truly stopped to wonder what goes on inside a narcissist's mind when the mask finally slips? It's a terrifyingly isolated moment for them. It's the moment when the public spotlight fades, when the adoring crowd disperses, and absolutely no one is left to admire them anymore. This inner experience is something they'll never willingly admit to. Not to you, not to any former friend, and perhaps most profoundly, not even to themselves in the deepest corners of their consciousness. But deep down beneath the carefully constructed facade of arrogance, the relentless need for control, and the endless pursuit of external validation, there lies something most narcissists secretly painfully regret. It is not the superficial things you might expect. It's not simply the loss of a valuable relationship that they discarded. It's not the money they chased, or the attention they briefly held, or even the slight tarnishing of their carefully curated public image. It is something much deeper, something existential, something that strikes right at the core of who they are and what their life has become. This deep, profound, and universally denied sorrow is the subject of today's exploration. Today we are pulling back the veil and uncovering the hidden regret of narcissists that nobody talks about. This is the regret that fuels their future destructive behavior and keeps them locked in a perpetual cycle of performance. And by the end of this video, you will possess a critical understanding of not only what they regret, but why this regret is the one inescapable truth they can never truly run from, no matter how hard they try to distract themselves with new sources of supply. Stay with me until the very end, because once you see what's really behind the narcissist's dramatic silence, their calculated indifference, and their forced empty confidence, you'll never look at them or the people they leave behind the same way again. The silence is not a sign of strength, it is a confession of profound inner pain. To genuinely understand the nature of their hidden regret, we first have to fully grasp what exactly is underneath the incredibly convincing mask they wear daily. Psychologists specializing in narcissistic personality disorder often describe narcissists as individuals who have constructed an entire persona, a complete false self. This false self is their heavy yet fragile armor, an elaborate, painstakingly detailed creation built brick by brick from superficial charm, highly exaggerated confidence, and an absolute reliance on external control. It is the character they play to secure the emotional supply that keeps them functioning. But peel away that perfectly polished armor, and you find not a solid core but something terrifyingly fragile and hollow, a gaping wound of deep-seated shame and an existential emptiness. This journey of self-deception often begins in childhood, where many narcissists learned a devastating lesson that genuine unconditional love is a myth and that acceptance is entirely conditional. They were implicitly or explicitly taught that to be valued, to avoid ridicule, and to gain the attention they craved, they had to constantly perform to be the best, the most admired, the smartest, or the most powerful in the room. So they meticulously built this powerful, demanding persona that forces attention and adoration, and in the excruciating process they completely severed ties with their vulnerable, authentic, and naturally flawed true self. They lost touch with the person they really are, the one who doesn't need to perform. But here is the critical pivot point, the moment where the performance fails, when life no longer readily feeds that persona, when people like you walk away and stop giving the required attention and emotional supply, the narcissist is left profoundly alone with the one person they've been desperately running from their entire life themselves. And that terrifying, suffocating confrontation is precisely when the paralyzing, existential regret begins to creep in. It's the sound of their internal world finally collapsing. Have you ever noticed how a narcissist absolutely cannot stand silence? How they always need background noise, constant drama, an emergency to fix, or a fresh source of attention? That pathological need for external stimulation is precisely because silence, the absence of an audience, forces them to feel the unbearable truth they have spent a lifetime burying. The deep, cold, and absolute sense of emptiness they fruitlessly tried to fill with power, admiration, and control. This inner void is the engine of their lifelong flight from self. Now let's get specific and break down the nuanced, heartbreaking things that narcissists actually regret, even though they would shatter their false self before ever admitting these feelings out loud. The first hidden regret is the regret for the people they drove away. In the immediate aftermath of a discard or a relationship ending, narcissists will typically act with icy indifference, appearing as though they don't care in the slightest that someone important has left their orbit. They quickly replace you with a new source of supply. They flood social media with highlight reels of their amazing life, and they launch a public smear campaign against you to pretend they have effortlessly and triumphantly moved on. But over the long, cold march of time, as the new supply proves to be imperfect and the initial burst of fresh admiration dries up, they invariably remember the people they pushed away. This is not because they suddenly develop genuine selfless love for you. They remember you because you represented something irreplaceable that they have lost. Genuine unconditional emotional connection and the comfortable non-judgmental stability you provided. Psychologists refer to this phenomenon as delayed emotional recognition. They realize often years too late that they brutally pushed away the very few people who were capable of seeing their humanity beneath the mask and still choosing to stay. And that devastating solitary realization profoundly haunts them in their quiet moments when the phone doesn't ring with new adoration, when the crowd is focused on someone else, and when the reflection in the mirror is just them. Let me ask you, have you ever had a narcissist suddenly reach out, often after months or even years of profound deliberate silence, perhaps with a meaningless text or a strange attempt to check in? That outreach is rarely love returning or a genuine apology. It is almost always deep-seated, painful regret disguised as curiosity, a subtle test to see if the old supply line might still be active, a desperate attempt to fill the emotional silence. They are reaching out to soothe their own inner abandonment, not to repair the damage they caused you. The second profound regret they carry is the regret for wasted potential. Most narcissists harbor grand delusional fantasies of immense success, universal admiration, and absolute unchallenged control over their environment. They truly believe they are destined for greatness, a hero, a visionary, or an untouchable genius. But because their entire motivation system is driven by their incredibly fragile ego, a need to look successful, and not by true deep-seated purpose or dedication, they are highly prone to self-sabotage and quitting. They will often quit a job or a project the moment they realize they are not instantly the best, or if they face constructive criticism that threatens their self-perception of perfection. They will lie, cheat, or manipulate others to protect their pristine image from even minor blemishes, and they will always blame external factors and other people when their plans inevitably fall apart. And in time, when they are older and the years have passed, they look back and see a catastrophic trail of destroyed opportunities, abandoned careers, and broken projects, all of which were sacrificed on the altar of trying to look perfect rather than daring to be imperfectly real. That is when the regret truly hits them with crushing force. Not because they feel genuine guilt over hurting others, that capacity for true empathy remains stunted, but because they realize they never became the successful self-made god they relentlessly pretended to be. It is the devastating, tragic moment when the mask they spent so long perfecting no longer fits the aging, anxious, and ultimately unsuccessful face beneath. They sacrifice their potential for an illusion. The third and most agonizing regret, the one that defines their final lonely years, is the regret for never truly feeling love. This is the deepest and most painful psychological cost of their personality disorder. You must understand that narcissists crave love, belonging, and acceptance. They crave it with a desperation that is almost childlike in its intensity. But they fear vulnerability even more than they crave love. To truly love someone means allowing yourself to be seen, warts and all. To be seen means to be completely exposed, and to be exposed means risking the ultimate, annihilating rejection that their fragile ego cannot psychologically withstand. So they develop a defensive, controlling strategy. Instead of seeking true love, they control it. They manipulate emotional responses. They make connection conditional, just as their caretakers did to them in those formative childhood years. They engineer relationships where they are always the superior party, the central figure, the one who is adored and needed. And over the course of a lifetime they realize, usually far too late, that they have never once experienced the true, messy, unconditional, and reciprocal nature of real love. They've relentlessly collected admiration and worship, but never genuine affection. They've commanded obedience and dependence, but never true intimacy. Imagine the profound, crushing weight of living an entire life where every single person who looks at you, including yourself, sees only the performance, the mask, the surface, but no one ever truly deeply sees the scared, empty person inside. That is the pervasive, soul-crushing loneliness they cannot intellectually outsmart or emotionally escape. Have you ever noticed how narcissists often seem to age poorly, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually? Their eyes often look dead or intensely anxious. That is the visible cumulative toll of a lifetime built entirely on a foundation of performance and illusion, a life lived in a terrifying vacuum of true emotional connection. You might be asking now, if narcissists carry such profound, multi-layered regret, why don't they simply admit it, apologize, and commit to changing their destructive patterns? The answer lies in the very architecture of their psychological defense system. Regret requires humility. And humility requires an immense, terrifying act of vulnerability. To say unequivocally, "I was wrong and I caused you pain," is the one utterance that is absolutely forbidden to the narcissist. It means completely tearing down the grand, untouchable, flawless image they've spent decades meticulously building and defending. It means accepting that they are not the hero in their own lifelong story. It means admitting that they are flawed, that they failed, and that they are perhaps the villain. And for a narcissist, the psychological pain of that admission is so profoundly unbearable, so absolutely annihilating that they would choose any other option. So what is their default setting? Instead of facing the truth, they automatically and flawlessly rewrite the narrative. They immediately convince themselves that you were the problem. You were ungrateful. You simply misunderstood their pure intentions, and you were toxic. They project the unbearable shame onto the easiest target, the person who left. But no amount of projection or rewriting the story can silence the deep physical internal reality of their loneliness. Their body keeps the score, and that inner emptiness never leaves. It only grows deeper, hardening into pervasive bitterness, chronic loneliness, and profound social isolation. Psychologists often observe that in later life, as the ability to attract new supply diminishes, many narcissists experience what is chillingly called an existential collapse. It is the traumatic moment when the false self, exhausted from decades of relentless performance, finally starts to crumble and decay, forcing them to realize that they have been performing their entire life for a tired, dwindling, and ultimately uninterested audience that has stopped watching. Here is the essential, life-changing takeaway I want you to internalize from this exploration. Their regret is not, was not, and will never be your responsibility. You might be tempted out of your deep, powerful empathy to wonder, do they ever miss me? Do they suffer? And perhaps in their own cold, distorted way, they do feel the sting of loss, the loss of what you provided them. But remember, missing the supply and truly valuing the person are two separate realities that do not overlap in the narcissistic mind. Your healing, your peace, and your freedom do not and should not depend on their eventual admission of regret or their ultimate suffering. In fact, their inevitable silent suffering is the most profound psychological proof that walking away and setting yourself free was the right, necessary, and vital choice for your survival. Ask yourself this fundamental question, and listen to the answer from your deepest self. Why would you ever choose to give away your hard-won peace, your precious time, and your limited emotional energy to someone who has already lost and chosen to ignore their own genuine peace? Their deep-seated, painful regret belongs entirely to them. Your magnificent, hard-won freedom, however, belongs entirely and absolutely to you. According to clinical psychologists and experts in trauma recovery, narcissists are psychologically trapped in a lifelong, self-constructed loop of intense self-protection. They will use denial, gaslighting, projection, and relentless manipulation to try and avoid facing the profound, unbearable shame that lives within their core. But every single defense mechanism, every clever tactic, every elaborate excuse eventually breaks down under the weight of real-life consequences. And when that defense structure inevitably crumbles, when the final, inevitable existential collapse occurs, they are left facing the one terrifying truth they have successfully avoided their entire life. They've never truly bothered to know, accept, or nurture who they actually are. That is the true hidden regret no one talks about. Not the relational loss of others, but the absolute tragic loss of self. It is the tragedy of having wasted a life becoming an aggressively performed character in your own story, rather than simply living as a real, authentic, and whole human being. They regret the self they destroyed for the sake of the mask. So now you know the truth. Narcissists do feel a complex, painful form of regret, but it is not the kind of healthy, empathetic regret that leads to genuine restorative change and accountability. It is the type that lives in crushing silence, hidden behind a thin veil of forced smiles, brittle confidence, and eventual isolation. Their biggest, most terrifying punishment isn't losing you or any of their other external sources of supply. It is being psychologically and emotionally trapped with the desolate, empty self they created. And your greatest victory, the one that proves your strength, is the profound realization that you have finally and completely broken free of their tragic, isolated orbit. If this video helped you understand more about the deep mechanisms of narcissistic behavior and validated your own journey toward healing and peace, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every time you share this awareness, you help someone else escape the silent trap of emotional manipulation and finally reclaim their precious peace. Remember this always: empathy is your greatest, most powerful strength, not a weakness they can exploit. And the narcissist's greatest regret, the one that follows them like a shadow, is the cold, hard realization that they will never ever be capable of generating or sustaining that kind of genuine, powerful strength again.